Ada. It was getting late as Jara struggled up the hill behind their house with a bucket full of water. A very strong wind had been blowing from the east all day long, making work difficult. Jara's hair whipped in front of her face. Water sloshed from the bucket. She paused for a moment to look at the beautiful sunset that was painting the sand dunes in the distance yellow, pink, orange, and purple. Clouds of sand rose and fell with the strong wind. Jara was relieved and delighted to see a green mist spreading out in the distances where before there had only been brown, ugly dirt. The hail and the other plagues had destroyed everything that had been growing. Now grass was slowly coming back and the leaves were growing on the trees. Jara shook out her arms and lifted the bucket again. She needed to get inside and get to bed. Work had been very hard the last couple of days. Suddenly, something filmy seemed to cover the sun. Jara looked up, alarmed. A huge, silver glittering cloud was rushing towards her. Jara screamed and ran for the house. Water splashed all over her as she ran with the bucket and entered the house, frantic. Everyone had already noticed the cloud and were looking through the windows. Jara noticed that the wind was getting stronger. Tirza was shouting, "What is it? What is it?" And Yanni was crying. Then Jara heard a humming sound, a buzzing sound. It was getting louder. "Oh no," Jara heard her father say. "What? What?" she cried, elbowing her way through her siblings and the window. The buzzing sound was right above them now, passing over their house and descending into the plain behind Ramesses. "Locusts," their father uttered the dreadful word. "I've never seen so many. As long as I've lived, it's another plague." "What do locusts do?" Tirza asked innocently, biting her lip. "They're like giant grasshoppers. They eat everything green," father explained. But the grass and leaves were just growing again," Shayna protested. "Am I Yahweh to ask why this is happening to the poor Egyptians?" father asked, sighing. "The poor people. If only Pharaoh would soften his heart." "Or the gods would take control and stop crushing their own people," mother suddenly said angrily. "This is again something to do with the gods. Every one of your so-called plagues has had something to do with an Egyptian god or sacred animal. This time it's locusts. Ugh!" Mother cried out in anger and desperation and marched outside of the hut to the fire pit, slamming the door behind her. "Mother was just telling us the other day why the locusts were sacred," Raphael told father, his eyes wide with fear. "Oh, Raphael, they aren't sacred. They have no more power than any other animal. Yahweh made all the animals just the way he wanted them to be. He didn't make any kind more special than the other kind. His great creation of the animals is supposed to point us back to worshiping him, not worshiping the things that he's created." "But then why did Yahweh make animals that eat all the plants like locusts?" Raphael asked, pouting a little. "It didn't start out that way. Adam and Eve brought sin into the world. That sin caused creation to fall and animals started eating each other or destroying things. It's because of us that bad things are all around us now. Yahweh just uses those bad things to show his power or teach us important lessons. Does that make sense?" Father pried, tenderly and gently, taking his little son onto his lap. Raphael nodded again. "Just remember, all of you, that Yahweh has a plan in all of this, even though we might not see it yet. Just like he brought Joseph to Egypt to save his people, I'm sure he is using this for the good of his people and to display his glory." Father looked around the room at all his children. Then his eyes rested on Jara as he finished. "He always has a plan." It was early morning, the day after the locusts had been taken away by a strong west wind, at Moses' command, and they had left behind utter devastation. Pharaoh sat on his throne, a scowl resting on his strong, handsome features. The Pharaoh was young and determined, angry and restless. When things weren't going his way, everyone in the palace knew it. So much time was being wasted by these plagues, and nothing seemed to be appeasing the gods. Had he not felt the terrible pain of the boils? He was almost healed now, but he would have scars on his arms and legs for the rest of his life. And what about the food? Everything was gone. All the crops for the year, all the food he had just imported. The locusts had eaten everything. They had even gotten into the storehouses. The door to the throne room opened. Pharaoh sighed in exasperation as he turned to see who had come. He didn't want to talk to any courtiers today, and especially not Moses and Aaron. He wanted to go make sure the overseers were doing their duty, but his face quickly lightened up in a slight smile as he saw one of his best friends, Ammon, his charioteer, walking towards him. 2 soldiers followed slightly behind him as he came up the royal carpet and bowed low before the Pharaoh. "Ammon, what brings you here, my friend?" the Pharaoh exclaimed with evident pleasure. He motioned for a low chair to be pulled up beside his ornate throne and bid Ammon to take a seat in it. "Well, it's sort of a favor I ask of you, my lord," Ammon said, a little hesitantly. "Oh?" Pharaoh lifted an eyebrow, curiously. "Yes, you see, well, you remember my son Paki, do you not?" "Oh, yes. Your son is a strong and good-looking young man, not to mention a faithful servant." "Well,"
Amun continued slowly. He has found a young woman he wants to be his wife. That's wonderful, Pharaoh exclaimed, quite excited about seeing the young servant with a family. Yes, but the lady he has set his mind on to be his wife is Ada, one of your wife's maids, I believe, sire. Ada. The Pharaoh's brow furrowed. Then he said, Yes, quite beautiful. May I congratulate your son on his excellent choice? Well, sir, that is why I've come to see you, Amun said. Since she is a servant, we need your permission for the marriage, and we need the permission of your queen. I certainly give my blessing. I will also talk to the queen directly before I begin my work for the day. Pharaoh called a servant to him and gave him instructions to bring the queen to him immediately, and that it was to be a private audience. Turning back to Amun, he said, It's a good thing that Paki wishes to keep everyone together in the palace. The Pharaoh seemed quite pleased, which made Amun very relieved, but he also noticed that Pharaoh seemed quite distracted. Thank you, my lord. You are most generous and kind. I will tell my son all that you have said, and eagerly await a message from you once you hear from the queen. Amun arose, bowed low once again, and left Pharaoh feeling much happier than he had before. When Ada presented herself early to the queen, she found only Lexine in the queen's chambers. Where's the queen? Ada asked in surprise. She's in an audience with Pharaoh, Lexine told her. With the Pharaoh? Why did she not want me to come? I usually go with her everywhere, Ada said, more to herself than to Lexine. It was supposed to be a private audience, I believe, Lexine said with a shrug, bending over her needlework. Ada sighed a little and hurried to the queen's sitting room to make sure everything was in readiness for breakfast. She had just returned to the bedchamber when the queen entered looking very pale. My queen, what's the matter? Ada asked with some alarm as the queen sat down heavily on her bed. I need some water, Ada, quickly, the queen panted out. Ada dashed into the sitting room and came back in an instant with a glass of water. The queen drank deeply and then seemed to calm down a bit. Is there nothing I can do for you? Ada asked softly. Yes, in a minute. I want you to come on a walk with me. But, my queen, what about your meal? You look like you need some nourishment. No, I'm fine. I don't want to eat, the queen replied shortly. Give me a wrap, Ada, and let us be off. In a minute the queen and her servant were walking down cool marble hallways towards the palace garden that overlooked the Nile River. The queen was silent, and Ada wisely remained silent too. The queen's face was hard and cold. Ada knew something was dreadfully wrong. They turned into a wide corridor and saw a royal entourage coming towards them. It was the queen's son Ramesses, the heir to the throne. At the young age of 14, the lad was strong, tall, surprisingly handsome, and very clever. He was accompanied by Panj, his tutor, and 2 servants carrying scrolls and the prince's weapons. 4 guards surrounded the prince, keeping him from harm. The queen's eyes lit up when she saw her son. The mother and son advanced towards one another, both showing little emotion, but Ada knew that they were thrilled to be together and truly loved each other. According to royal custom, the 2 rarely saw each other and weren't allowed to show their affection. My queen, Ramesses bowed in reverence. My son, the queen nodded her head in acknowledgement. How are you faring? How is your instruction progressing? I'm well. Panj has taught me much and says that I'm ahead of the other princes and princesses in my learning. We're on our way to the stables to drive chariots and practice with my bow and arrows. Then go, my son, and may the gods watch over you and protect you, the queen said, a soft smile spreading across her face. Ramesses bowed again and then looked up into his mother's eyes. Ada read longing, sorrow, and loneliness in his eyes. She felt compassion for him. The life of the heir wasn't easy. Good day, your majesty, the prince said quietly. He straightened and strode down the corridor, throwing a last, longing glance towards his mother. Goodbye, the queen whispered. She gave a long, forlorn sigh, and Ada saw the queen blink back tears. Then she drew in her breath sharply, threw back her shoulders, and said, Now, on to the matter at hand. The queen walked towards a fountain that was shaded by a small dome of marble. Ada lamented the fact that all of the plants that had once surrounded this private place were gone. The queen knew that here they would not be disturbed, and sitting down gracefully on the lip of the fountain, she exhaled deeply and motioned for Ada to join her. Ada, she began at length, I have had some very unexpected and disturbing news from my husband Pharaoh, and it involves you. Involves me? Ada almost shrieked, jumping to her feet in shock. What have I done, your majesty? No, my child, it is not something you have done, but it's still something that concerns you, the queen assured her. Ada slowly sat down and took a deep breath before asking, How so, my lady? You know of Amun, my husband's charioteer, do you not? Ada nodded her head. Amun had been in the palace since he was a mere child. He and Pharaoh practically grew up together, and so Amun has always been close to Pharaoh's heart and wishes. Well, this morning Amun approached Pharaoh about you becoming the wife of his son, Paki. Ada gasped, but the queen went on. Pharaoh thinks that it would be an excellent match and you would both be able to still serve at the palace. But I had hoped you would never marry. I want you always by my side, and if you were to get married and have a family, then you would not be able to be as faithful to me. The queen paused for a few moments and Ada tried to calm her thoughts. Paki, how can I marry him? He's a kind, honest young man and a true servant, but he's an Egyptian. He worships the Egyptian gods wholeheartedly. How can I marry him? What did you tell Pharaoh, my queen? Ada asked, surprised at the peaceful tone that she was able to force into her voice. I told him my concerns, but he seems very set on the marriage. Then, is there still any hope? Any possibility that I might not have to marry this man? I would much rather marry within my own people or just stay unmarried and serve you, my queen, she added hopefully. The queen shook her head sadly and gazed out over the Nile. I'm afraid there is no hope. I will try to talk to him again, but my husband's word is law. He is able to make you marry. Tears of shock and sadness formed in Ada's eyes. She quickly blinked them back, but the queen still noticed. Ada, she reached out and touched Ada's arm in a very motherly fashion. I know this comes as a great shock for you. I was shocked as well, but Paki is a good man. If you must marry, I would much rather have you marry inside the palace. But I will talk to my husband again and try to persuade him otherwise. I can promise you that, since he has been so distracted recently, perhaps we will have enough time to change his mind. Thank you, my queen. You are kind, Ada replied with a forced smile. The rest of the morning and afternoon dragged on like an eternity for Ada. She felt miserable, but had to act joyful. She tried to think about whether or not she should ask to leave to visit her family and tell them the news or just send another message. In the late afternoon, storm clouds rolled in off of the sea, making everything dark and rather cool. The queen complained of a headache and lay down, sending Ada off to get some herbs and water for her. Finally, Ada could have some time alone to think and pray. Why me? Why did Paki choose me? What will I say? What will I do? Oh, Yahweh, please don't make me marry this man. Please save me from being married to a pagan, she prayed as she walked back from the kitchen through the dark passages of the palace. Though Ada hardly wanted to admit it, she had always admired Eaton. But since she was in the palace, and he was just a common slave, she knew that no relationship could exist between them. Still, when she compared Eaton to Paki, she knew that Paki was not what she desired in a husband. Abruptly, the sound of pottery shattering on the floor startled Ada. She peered into the darkness. Hello? Who's there? The next instant an arm was thrown around her neck, holding her tightly. Ada struggled but couldn't move. She started to scream, but a hand was clamped over her mouth. She felt cold metal against her throat. She cranked her neck backwards and saw the dark skin of an Egyptian man. Prepare to meet your death, Hebrew dog, he spat out. Ada panicked. She hardly realized what she was doing. She kicked her attacker as hard as she could. A low grunt of pain escaped the man and he relaxed his grip on her. Quick as a flash, she was free. She threw his arms into the wall and heard the knife clatter to the floor. Then she darted down the hallway, but the Egyptian had recovered himself quickly and was right behind her. Help! Ada screamed. Somebody help me! Someone stepped out in front of Ada, blocking her path. She shrieked, but whoever it was grabbed her gently and moved protectively in front of her. He put an arm out to guard her. Ada turned to see the first man charging down the hallway. He stopped abruptly on seeing Ada behind her protector. Get out of the way, Paki, the man growled. This has nothing to do with you. That Hebrew dog needs to die so that the gods can be appeased. Ada gasped as she realized who her savior was. I think this has everything to do with me, Heru. Paki's voice was surprisingly nonchalant. You see, I happen to believe that the Hebrews have nothing to do with this nasty affair, and I know that this young lady is especially innocent. Furthermore, I'm not going to stand by and let her be murdered in cold blood, so I suggest you go on your way before I call the guards. Why, you little... Something akin to a roar escaped Heru's throat. He flew at Paki with the rage of a wild animal. Paki held his ground until Heru was practically on top of him. Then a knife seemed to leap into his hand of its own accord, and in a moment the two men were engaged in a life-or-death duel. Guards! Guards! Ada cried, pressing herself up against the wall to stay out of the way of the flashing blades. Suddenly Heru reached out and pushed Paki into the wall with his spare hand. The dagger was coming down towards Paki's chest. Ada couldn't breathe, couldn't move. The next moment was a blur. Pocky threw himself forward and down into a roll, knocking Haru off balance. Haru fell heavily on the ground, and the knife flew from his hand and landed at Ada's feet. Ada instinctively reached out and grabbed it, while Pocky at the same moment leapt up upon Haru's back and put his dagger against Haru's neck. "One move and you die," Pocky hissed, panting from exertion. Haru lay perfectly still, but he uttered foul curses under his breath. Ada heard footsteps echoing down the hall. "The soldiers are coming," she breathed in relief. As Haru heard this, he made one last effort to escape, but Pocky grabbed Haru's arms and pinned them behind Haru's back with one hand, still keeping the dagger against his opponent's neck. The guards came rushing down the hallway. When Ada saw them, utter relief swept over her. Her knees felt weak and she sank to the floor. Her head was spinning and she found it hard to see. She barely heard Pocky explain rapidly what had just happened. As if in a daze, she saw 3 guards leading Haru away. Abruptly, everything was quiet and Pocky was kneeling next to her. "Are you all right?" he asked in concern. Ada didn't trust herself to speak. She simply nodded. She was trembling all over and tears were threatening to spill out of her eyes. "Are you sure?" Pocky pressed. Ada nodded again, choking back a sob. "Yes," she whispered. "Thank you," she sobbed out. Pocky gave her a half grin. "You look quite stunned. Here, let me help you back to your chambers." Pocky grabbed both of her hands and slowly helped her to her feet. Ada's heart was still pounding, and she realized that she was truly crying and not just sobbing anymore. She clung to Pocky's arm, barely able to stand. She felt dizzy and thought she might fall. "Shh, it's all right. You're safe now," Pocky said comfortingly. He slowly led her through the hallways, supporting her and helping her along the way. Before Ada fully realized what was happening, a guard was opening the door to the Queen's apartments. There were exclamations of surprise from the women inside as Pocky assisted Ada in and guided her to a chair. "Ada, what has happened? Are you hurt?" the Queen exclaimed. Ada shook her head and swallowed. She tried to speak, but Pocky placed a hand on her shoulder and spoke for her. "She has been attacked by an Egyptian servant. He has been captured and some guards have taken him to prison." "What?" the Queen gasped. "Who was it? He will certainly be killed for laying a hand on my servant." "His name is Haru, my lady. He has been a guard here for several years. I've known him to be a very superstitious man, and I think he believes, as do many of the servants here, that the Hebrews are causing the plagues. I'm glad I heard Ada's cries when I did. Haru attacked her in a quiet corridor and the guards would not have come in time," Pocky explained. "Pocky, how can I ever thank you enough?" the Queen said in excited tones. Pocky just shrugged and said it was nothing. Lexine had been attending to Ada, giving her water and examining her scratches and bruises. Ada could feel a little bit of color coming back into her cheeks. "I believe that Ada is fine, my lady, but a little stunned, as any girl would be," Lexine reported to the Queen. "Good," the Queen said with a sigh of relief. "Pocky, did you say that there are others in the palace that feel the same way about the Hebrews?" "Yes, my lady, I'm afraid there are, though I doubt that many of them would take drastic steps like Haru did. But others might? Do you really think that there's danger for Ada and possibly Lexine right here in the palace?" the Queen fretted. "There is that possibility, my Queen," Pocky replied, nodding his head. The Queen clutched her heart and fear filled her eyes. "I must send out a decree at once that if anyone lays a hand on one of my slaves that he shall be instantly put to death. Do you think that will dissuade these horrible men?" "Possibly, my Queen, but there could be other men who were in league with Haru and will do anything to avenge his execution and carry out the deed that he desired to do. Until an inquiry and trial take place, we can't be sure that Ada will not be attacked again." The Queen was now anxiously pacing the floor. Ada was starting to regain her composure, but all this talk about people waiting around dark hallways for the sole intent of killing her made a pang of fear drive deeply into her heart. "What do you think I should do for Ada's safety, Pocky?" the Queen asked at length. Ada was surprised by the amount of trust she was putting in this young man. "I have no right to tell your ladyship anything," Pocky began softly, "but I would humbly suggest that Ada and possibly Lexine be sent back to Goshen for a short amount of time until formal inquiries can be made. None of the people in the palace, besides your ladyship, my lordship, and myself, know where Ada and Lexine live. There I think they will be safe until we find out who is involved with this conspiracy." The Queen stood still, staring off into space, tapping her finger against her leg. Finally she said, "Yes, Pocky, I do believe you are right." The Queen quickly turned towards Pocky and said, "Go get several guards that you know you can trust for a strong escort, and please tell Pharaoh that I request a private audience with him about this matter. Come back here when everything is in readiness, and please escort Ada and Lexine back to their homes. Dismiss the soldiers once you get to the border of Goshen so that they don't know of my servants' whereabouts." "Yes, my Queen." Pocky bowed respectfully and turned to go. Ada was finally able to collect her voice, and she called out after him, "Paki?" He turned to face her. "Thank you. I know I wouldn't be alive if you had not come in time." Paki smiled, a very nice smile, Ada noted. "You're welcome. I was glad to be of service to you." With a parting smile, he left. "Lexine, go quickly and pack some things for Ada and yourself. I expect you'll be gone at least overnight. Ada, try to rest and enjoy yourself in Goshen. I'm loath to part with you, but I believe with all that has happened today that Paki is right. Just sit here until the escort is ready. You look quite shocked, poor child." "Thank you, my queen. You are too kind," Ada murmured. Her thoughts were swirling. She was really going home. Home, away from this wonderful but horrible place and all the terror and new things it held for her.